This is Naomi Scott Brichter, and I'm going to serve as host of today's call, as I mentioned before. I'm the program associate at the Jewish Teen Funders Network, and the Jewish Teen Funders Network is a national network that works with program leaders of teen philanthropy programs around the country. So we help to strengthen and grow the field of Jewish teen philanthropy. Some of you are part of one of our new pilots. Our new program, a camp program that we've been working on, and some of you have been part of our network for a long time. But I just wanted to give that little introduction and offer that if anyone's interested in talking more, I heard someone that may be new at teen philanthropy or considering it. I'm always available to be in touch at any time, and my email we'll put into the chat a little bit later. I also want to say that as a national network, we send our love to our colleagues in Boston after the tragedy yesterday. So now I want to welcome you to the third call in our Winter and Spring 2013 Lunch and Learn series, What Jewish Teen Philanthropy Can Learn from Service Learning. In this call, we'll learn about the components of Jewish service learning programs with an eye towards elements that can inform our work in Jewish teen philanthropy. Talya Gillman will offer an overview of the three key program components: education, Jewish values, and reflection. I had the idea for this call when I saw a recent report that Repair the World put out, and it seemed to me that there were many connections between Jewish service learning and teen philanthropy, and that we could use some of the language that service learning uses in our programs because we're doing so many of the same things. So I hope you'll share that interest with me today. Before we begin, let me tell you a little bit about Talya. Talya is a partnerships manager at Repair the World, an organization dedicated to making service to others a defining element of Jewish life. At Repair, Talya manages partnerships with a variety of Jewish organizations seeking to develop social action experiences that are valuable to volunteers and host communities alike. She joined Repair in 2010 after returning from India, where she spent 14 months as a World Partners Fellow through AJWS, American Jewish World Service. Previously, she worked for Seattle Children's Hospital, interned with Atsum, an Israeli organization that combats sex trafficking, and taught at a Seattle-based religious school for several years. Now I will turn the floor over to Talya.
Thank you, Naomi, and hi, everyone. Thanks for being here today. I hope everyone can hear me, and if you can't, just send a chat, and we'll try and fix that. As Naomi said, my name is Talya Gillman, and I'm the Manager of Partnerships at Repair the World. As she described, we're a national organization dedicated to making service a defining value of American Jewish life, learning, and leadership, and we were founded by a group of Jewish philanthropic leaders in 2009 to help bring this mission to life. At Repair, I coordinate relationships with organizations who work with Jewish young adults, local Hillels across the country, Moishe House, Bronfman Youth Fellowships in Israel, and others, to help them embed the values of service and social action into their DNA, to basically help them put into practice social justice inclinations they may feel strongly about, but are not necessarily sure how to manifest. So we help them develop the capabilities necessary to organize and facilitate meaningful and impactful social action experiences for their constituents and communities. And we teach them to do this primarily through a methodology of Jewish service learning. So today I want to share with you some ideas and suggestions about how Jewish service learning might complement the work you do in Jewish teen philanthropy. I'll spend some time unpacking what Jewish service learning means. I'll make the case for why these kinds of activities and conversations are so important in the work that we all do with young adults, and I'll offer some thoughts about three different instructional themes to consider if you're interested in integrating Jewish service learning into your teen philanthropy programs. My hope is that by the end of this exploration of Jewish service learning, you'll understand it to be a powerful strategy for strengthening the abilities of your teens to be impactful leaders in their communities in the world, and that you'll have some tools to continue thinking about how you might incorporate it into your work. And before we dive in, I just want to pause for a moment and mention that there's a tradition in Judaism that some of you may know, that when you engage in study or learning about something, that you do it in the name of someone, in honor of someone. So today, let's spend the next half hour or so learning about this idea of Jewish service learning in the name of the individuals and families affected by the horrifying events in Boston yesterday. Let me just flip to our slide here. There we go. So I want to begin by grounding us in our common bottom line, what it is that Jewish Teen Funders Network and Repair the World are actually both working towards. And we actually use some similar approaches to our work. I would suggest that what we're all trying to produce, our end goal, as you offer teen philanthropic experiences that are bolstered by Jewish values and learning, and as we at Repair create volunteer experiences that incorporate learning, reflection, and Judaism, that what we're trying to create is a generation of young people who understand and live out their values, who possess the skills and dedication needed to effectively address the problems they see in the world, whether it's through philanthropy or service, and that they're either motivated by Judaism or that they understand that Judaism has something important to say about what they're doing as they work to tackle the problems they see around them. And at Repair the World, we use the term Jewish service people to describe the archetype that encompasses these characteristics. At Repair, we want to help communities cultivate as many Jewish service people as possible because we believe that when folks understand who they are and what they're responsible for, when they have the skills and critical thinking abilities necessary to perform effective social action work, and when their efforts become an authentic expression of their Jewish values and identities, that the Jewish community will really be on track to better repair pockets of our world. And what I'll talk about next suggests that Jewish service people are developed through Jewish service learning types of conversations and experiences. So let's keep this idea of Jewish service people in mind as we jump into some discussion about what Jewish service learning actually is and how it might be useful. Jewish service learning, so JSL is what we call it for short at Repair, is a program model that integrates direct hands-on service or volunteering, or in your case, the philanthropic work that your teens do, with related and structured learning and reflection. Each of these components of the experience are infused with Judaism in ways that I'll speak to in a bit. And the integration of these elements is intended to deepen participants' learning and opportunities to grow. It's intended to cultivate dedication to and abilities necessary for meaningful civic engagement. And it's intended to strengthen the bonds within groups that engage in these kinds of experiences together. And you can probably already see how the intended results of Jewish service learning map to the characteristics of a Jewish service person I described a minute ago. So on the screen, you can see some considerations that Jewish service learning facilitators will ideally think about in as far advance as possible before they find themselves in a room with their participants. The first is establishing learner outcomes. That is, what exactly they want their participants to learn, to think about, or to take away from the experience. And this can be done on two levels. One is for the overarching program that may take place over an extended period of time, and the second is for each session or time the group meets. You probably already think about these things in your work, but I think it's helpful to sort of zero in on them as we explore the Jewish service learning framework. So with those kinds of learner outcomes in mind, the facilitator can develop an educational framework that they integrate into the direct service, or in your case, philanthropic experiences. In Jewish service learning, the educational framework should touch on three overlapping arenas: the Jewish, the societal, and the personal. Those are the colorful bubbles on the screen. So in this way, the Jewish service learning that a facilitator builds out should root the participants' experience in Judaism somehow. It should deepen participants' understanding of the various social, cultural, economic, historical, political contexts that surround the issues they're working on, or that the organizations they're supporting are working in. And it should enable participants to reflect on their experiences and observations and the feelings or questions that may come up as a result. And I think it's worth mentioning that these kinds of Jewish service learning conversations, these kinds of JSL conversations, can happen at almost any time and almost anywhere, depending on the logistics and circumstances your program takes place in. JSL activity can happen as often or as sporadically as is possible. Something is always better than nothing, as long as the discussions and reflection are constructed to offer participants a complete experience relative to the time you have available. So, in other words, JSL should be designed to lead participants on a learning and reflection-oriented journey, but the journey that's set up by the facilitator shouldn't be too long or intensive that it leaves participants stranded if time runs out. We want participants to leave conversations still pondering important questions, but not because the conversation ended up being cut off for logistical reasons. And that's why it's so important to plan these things in advance of the actual conversations themselves. So to that end, it's important for facilitators to plan ahead for when specifically these discussions will take place relative to the actual service or philanthropy work that their participants are experiencing. If these kinds of learning and reflective conversations are crammed in as afterthoughts, our participants will really pick up on that modeling, and they'll be less likely to appreciate the activities or understand why they're important. So instead, facilitators need to decide ahead of time how they'll strategically integrate learning and reflection so it's both productive and attractive to participants. Likewise, JSL activities can happen in a range of spaces, and facilitators should think about the kinds of spaces that are conducive to their participants' learning and reflection. What kinds of settings will help them take in sometimes complicated information? Where will they feel comfortable being vulnerable and sharing their personal thoughts and new ideas? Sometimes a classroom or boardroom makes the most sense, but sometimes it's helpful to think creatively too. Can you meet in a park if it's nice outside? Can you visit a museum that features an exhibit related to issues you've been talking about? And sometimes it's even helpful to use a participant or two as informants or thought partners as you plan these things by talking with them about the kinds of settings that they would prefer to talk about these things in. So what I've just described is a very condensed version of Jewish Service Learning 101, and it's a lot of information about a rich pedagogical approach. And I want to open it up and see if anyone has thoughts to share about how this Jewish Service Learning framework might resonate with Jewish teen philanthropy. Are there similarities to the learning and training you do with your teens? And Naomi, I'm not sure what the protocol is, but maybe you can.
Sure. I'm going to unmute everybody for this for a short time.
The conference has been unmuted.
So if you think there's any particular background noise where you are, you can press *6 to remute yourself. Don't use your phone because it may create background noise. And I'll let Talya repeat the question so we can stay focused.
Yeah, so the question is, given everything I've just described about Jewish service learning, does anything resonate with things that you're already thinking about or doing in your own work?
This is Rachel Wiesenberg from Temple Beth Torah. We actually have a program that basically looks just like this, and when JTFN came along, we basically layered JTFN onto that track of our high school program.
Oh, wow, that's amazing.
Yeah. I mean, it's like literally the same thing. Like, we present a Jewish value, we do some role play, we go and do service learning, and then we always leave time for reflection. I'm really happy to hear that something is better than nothing, because sometimes it really hasn't been like these long discussions. It's really just been sort of an emotional check-in.
Yeah. I'm going to go into a couple of strategies in depth in a few minutes, but I want to just preface that diving into those things by saying that it's really challenging to build these things into your program, and so the something is better than nothing is a helpful validating reminder to ourselves as we're trying to do these things.
Talya, I know that some programs use teens themselves to help plan, as you mentioned. Can anyone speak to that on the call?
I can. In Portland, our Oregon Jewish Community Youth Foundation has a focus on the philanthropy side of all of this, but we've asked our older teens, and they've expressed a lot of interest in volunteering, and it's been pretty self-directed on their part. I've tried to support them in their finding places to go and volunteer, and there's been mixed success. Some students are very motivated, and others don't follow through. But we've let it be their thing.
Mm-hmm.
I completely agree, Rachel, again, on Long Island. We have a teen board, actually, and they've been using social media, actually, throughout the year. So, for example, they put up on the Facebook page for the program a variety of different walks, like different causes that they could do a walk for or that they could do an event for, and then the rest of the teens from our program actually then voted for which organization they wanted to help, and based on that, we're actually doing something with Autism Speaks in a couple of weeks. So that is just one example. There were a couple times throughout the year where other things happened. I really find that using social media is something that is 100% on their level, sometimes even more so than it is mine. But yeah, definitely it happens, and I think there's a lot more buy-in.
Yeah, the idea of social media is a really important one, as you said, because it sort of meets the young people where they're at. And so I think that's a helpful thing to sort of keep in the backs of our minds as I go into depth about Jewish service learning strategies and how can those be tailored to social media activity.
Cool.
I think I'm going to move us along.
Terrific. I'm just going to press mute again so we avoid any background noise.
The conference has been muted.
We're all set, Talya. Oh, I'm sorry. You know what, Talya? You have to press *7 again. My apologies.
Okay, there
you
we
go.
So thank you guys for sharing some information and thoughts about your own work. And I want to transition to mention a resource that Repair the World has developed to help guide people through the process of designing and implementing high-quality Jewish service learning projects. And even though this resource, which is called Service That Matters, is geared towards developing volunteer projects, I think it contains helpful language and ideas that could resonate with Jewish teen philanthropy work as well. Service That Matters is made up of several components or steps, and 3 of these, which I'm going to talk about today, are education and learning, Judaism and Jewish values, and reflection. These 3 buckets or instructional themes could be useful in thinking about building JSL into Jewish teen philanthropy, so I want to focus on what they might look like in practice. But before I go into them, I want to spend a few minutes talking about the goal of those strategies, which is this idea of disruption. I want to assert that in order for teens or for any participants to manifest the qualities and behaviors we'd like them to, they need to be meaningfully and safely disrupted. By this I mean that they need to have eye-opening or even soul-clenching, so to speak, experiences about the realities and complexities of the world around them. And of course, Jewish service learning, our topic of the day, is a helpful framework for guiding participants along this disruption journey. The diagram on the screen shows what this process can look like. The various stages that a person may go through as they become agitated by their experiences and circumstances they begin to learn more deeply about. This process can happen specific to a given program experience, like Jewish teen philanthropy, and it can also happen over the course of a lifetime. So generally as humans, we start out by assuming that everything around us is fine and as it should be. When we're led through disruptive experiences, we may experience a breach in that previous worldview. We may begin to question what we previously assumed. Then, we often become confused. Competing realities and truths leave us with more questions than answers. As we're guided through these stages, which, by the way, are not necessarily linear or clean-cut, they may overlap or happen out of order, which is just the nature of being human. As we're led through these stages, we can begin to arrive at a place of compassion. And here we can think about how to reconcile and productively navigate the complexities we've become aware of and have been grappling with. Finally, through learning and reflection, we may reach a place of readiness to determine exactly how we as individuals can or need to respond. What can I offer, and what's my role in this complicated world? Again, Jewish service learning strategies are designed to propel participants from stage to stage. But the critical actor here, in Repair the World's work and in your work, is the person facilitating everything, the guide. And that's the little blue person on the screen. That's you and I and all the people leading participants through these processes of disruption, this journey from fairness assumption to breach in worldview to confusion to compassion to role decision. So That actually brings me to my second assertion, which is that in order to productively and authentically lead participants through the journey, it's critical for that little blue person, for us, to also have such productive and disruptive experiences where we grapple with the societal and global complexities and where we begin to understand what our unique values and capabilities and responsibilities are. And without these, it will be much, much harder for us to facilitate our participants' disruption and to help them grow. In our guidance, we need to model for our participants what's possible by having had similar experiences and thought processes. And we have to show them through our language and behavior, the way we lead discussions, and the way we bring Judaism into their experiences, that learning and reflection, combined with social action, are instrumental parts of Jewish life. If the participants see that we, the facilitators, don't buy into the importance of this integration ourselves, then we're not really propelling our end goal of cultivating the kinds of Jewish service people I talked about a few minutes ago. We're instead kind of undermining the depth of their experiences by implicitly sending the message that it doesn't really matter whether we're intentional or thoughtful about our social action. And it's a little scary because we have a real responsibility, but also an opportunity here. But beyond that, asking these things of facilitators is daunting because it requires extra work, and not even just extra administrative work. It demands real personal work and reflection. But a foundational marker of an effective facilitator, and this is reflected in various research and literature that Repair the World has commissioned, is that the facilitator has themselves grappled with the questions and complexities they're leading their participants through, and that the participants can rely on their facilitator to bring themselves and their own experiences to the conversations in some way. As I said, facilitators need to model for participants what's possible. And I know that what I just talked about may sound a little provoking, so I want to pause here and ask if there are any questions.
So, Talya, there's a great question. Rabbi Rachel Weisenberg, can you press star 7 so that you can ask your question?
Yeah, I was just wondering, I've been a part of other programs before where we've done other kinds of reflection groups, and obviously there's this in some ways is very similar in terms of counseling and things like that. My question is, should we be explicit to our students about the disruption process, or is it a method we know and should model but not name and discuss explicitly with them?
That's a great question. I think in a lot of ways it depends on the kinds of circumstances you're working in and the kinds of experiences that you're facilitating for your participants.
Mm-hmm.
I think to some degree it is powerful to frame the process for your participants maybe in different terms. You don't want to give away the pedagogical approach, but I think it is helpful to be transparent with them about the intentionality and, to some degree, intensiveness of the kinds of conversations that you're seeking to have with them.
Okay.
Okay, so if you have additional questions, just feel free to type them in. But I'm going to move us along. So we just talked about the disruption factor of Jewish service learning and our roles as facilitators of that disruption. So let's jump in and talk about what this actually looks like. So I mentioned Repair the World's framework for Jewish service learning, service that matters, and 3 buckets to think about: education and learning, Judaism and Jewish values, and reflection. Each of these are tools for facilitating disruption. And before I go into them, I want to suggest a checklist of factors that a facilitator should aim for when building some of these kinds of activities into a service or teen philanthropy experience. As much as possible, JSL should be fun, inclusive and respectful of everyone's ideas and opinions, interesting and meaningful, and facilitated in an open and safe setting, one that's characterized by trust. And as you probably all know, it takes work to foster that kind of environment. So it's something to be very conscious of in terms of how you introduce and frame the JSL. Another thing that's not up on the screen is that JSL should enable participants to develop ideas themselves. Telling is not as effective as leading people to arrive at their own conclusions about a given issue. So as you can probably sense, facilitating JSL is really an art that takes a long time to master. But it's these factors on the screen in support of that productive disruption that I talked about that can set us up for success as we use Jewish service learning to retain interest amongst our participants and to help them grow as service people, as Jewish service people. I'll preface the next 3 slides by saying that it's definitely not feasible or even wise to integrate all the things I'm going to mention into a program, and that's okay, because Jewish service learning is about determining what will add meaning and depth to a program, not simply how much you can add in. So I'm going to share some thoughts about the scope of what's possible, and hopefully some of it will feel adaptable to your own work. Okay, so after all of that introduction talk, we finally arrived at the first bucket, or instructional theme, which is education and learning. Education and learning encompass not only the actual training you do around philanthropic practices and what it means to be a funder. For now, let's think about this education and learning theme only as it relates to helping teens learn about the social, economic, political, historical, or cultural contexts that surround the nonprofits they're working with or the social issues they're focusing on through their philanthropy. When we spend time with participants thinking and learning about the issues behind their work, they become more effective philanthropists, better advocates for the causes they're supporting, and more informed citizens overall. So maybe you have a social issue theme like hunger or homelessness that you focus on over the course of the whole program, or maybe you interact with a whole range of social issues throughout the year. Either way, the most important thing for a facilitator is to decide in advance, to the extent possible, a couple of things. Specifically, what you want your participants to learn and think about, establishing those learner outcomes I mentioned earlier. Again, JSL facilitators can develop learning outcomes for the overall program that takes place over the course of several months and for each of the learning conversations that make up the larger program. And if only 1 or 2 of these learning conversations are possible because of the program's length or logistics, great. Something's better than nothing, and a facilitator can plan learning outcomes for those 2 opportunities. So when thinking about what you want participants to learn or think about, remember that the experience is supposed to do 2 things: help foster their critical thinking and push them to explore new things. So it's important to bring in information that challenges them, information that they aren't necessarily familiar with already, or that isn't part of the mainstream narrative, or maybe even different perspectives about the same issue. You want to go with information and perspectives that teens might be interested in continuing to explore on their own time. So, for example, if you're working on hunger and homelessness, beyond turning to statistics from a well-established local food bank, are there ways to take in the perspectives of individuals who are homeless themselves? What do local politicians have to say? And how might these things expand the teens' understanding of the issue they're learning about? How might they spark the teens' journey beyond the fairness assumption stage that I mentioned when I talked about disruption? Now, the next factor for education and learning that should be planned in advance is who can help teach your teens about the underlying issues if you yourself don't have the time to become an expert on hunger in your city, or if you don't have the bandwidth to study how homelessness affects residents in your community. Who or what can speak to those things in an informative and compelling way? And finally, the third factor to plan ahead of time is how you'll present or help teens learn the information. Learning can happen in so many ways, through primary and secondary sources, guest speakers, informal conversations amongst participants, meeting with community members or experts or leaders of the nonprofits they're supporting, watching internet videos that are relevant somehow. The list goes on. And obviously, the more creative you get, the more you'll pick your team's interest. So let's move on to this idea of embedding Judaism into the experience. I want to flag that when I say integrating Judaism in a Jewish service learning context, I don't mean inserting a familiar Jewish text that's been used time and time again at the end of a meeting. As facilitators, we need to ensure that we're offering access to the richness and scope that the Jewish tradition has to offer. Doing so can help deepen participants' relationships to Judaism by familiarizing them with Jewish language and resources, building community amongst peers who share common history, culture, tradition, and interest in social action, and showing them that Judaism really has something relevant and helpful to say about what they're doing. I mentioned that we want to be as intentional as possible in embedding Judaism into the experience. If we only superficially share a text, for example, we may reinforce the sense that Judaism has little to contribute to contemporary issues or the teens' own lives. That's an idea that's explored by Lisa Exler and Rabbi Jill Jacobs in an article they wrote for an edition of the Journal of Jewish Communal Service. In the article, they suggest that an approach of using more than the Jewish texts and resources that perfectly align with your agenda, with the program's agenda, is the best way. Cherry picking is not only disloyal to the Jewish textual tradition, they say, but it's also a poor pedagogical choice because it provides participants no chance to struggle. The experience of engaging with Jewish texts and resources will be richest if the texts themselves provoke discussion and disruption. And this means choosing resources that challenge, that offer different perspectives, and that represent a range of time periods and perspectives. Now, the good news is that Jewish history, culture, and tradition is so vast that there are a range of places to look for these kinds of resources. What ideas, traditional texts and resources, old and contemporary pieces from literature and the arts, historical events, cultural practices, religious traditions, and even the teen's own family experiences can you bring in to foster meaningful conversations that help illuminate the relationship between the teen's philanthropy and Judaism? Of course, there's no need to pull in everything I listed, but think about which kinds of things might resonate with the other conversations you're having about how philanthropy works and the social issues you've been talking about. Now, just to give some specific examples, beyond sitting around a table and reading or looking at texts, there are other ways to build Judaism into the teen's experience. The first time you meet as a group, introduce the idea of setting a kavanah, a blessing or an intention, at each of the meetings that will follow. Then, after discussing what the experience is all about, instruct the teens to write their own kavanot, expressions of what they're committing to, what they're hoping for through the experience, and things of that nature, and ask a different person to share their kavanah at the beginning of each subsequent meeting. Another example, if you study a Jewish resource together at one meeting, find a way to organically weave it into a conversation that you have during a visit to a local nonprofit organization, or find a way to bring in a new text or idea during a teachable moment during a visit during the same kind of visit. Have the teens study the histories of Jewish philanthropists and social justice leaders of the past. This will help them connect to a lineage of people who came from the same tradition and were committed to similar ideals. Or you can use Hebrew terminology when talking about different concepts and values. Now, I want to mention that similar to education and learning, it's very common for Jewish service learning facilitators to bring in outside educators and guests to help with these Jewish dimensions of the experience, especially if they have less familiarity or feel less comfortable leading them. It can be intimidating at first, but it's worth exploring because, again, it helps bolster participants' growth as Jewish service people. Now, thinking about the third bucket of Jewish service learning methodology, reflection. Create opportunities for your participants to reflect upon their philanthropy so that they think out loud or quietly before, during, and or immediately after their philanthropy experiences. This allows them to contemplate their efforts in the greater context of their values and life experiences, enabling them to think about their larger roles in the world. It's this kind of personal reflection on their experiences, observations, ideas, and feelings that helps move them along that path of productive disruption. Beyond that, it actually helps them begin to distill what they value and what they want to prioritize in their lives and what their abilities and responsibilities as people and as Jews are. It's the reflection that helps tie together all of the other conversations you have throughout the Jewish Teen Philanthropy Program. Like the other things I've talked about, it's really important to plan reflective conversations in advance. Obviously, you can't plan what your participants will say, but it's extremely helpful to sketch out for yourself the topics and questions you want to cover through your activity. And as with the other buckets, it's critical to actively develop a dynamic of respect and trust amongst the group, particularly when it comes to reflection, so that your teens feel comfortable sharing their personal reflections with one another. Now, in terms of planning reflection itself, I've offered a framework in the lower right-hand corner, that's the green circle, for thinking about how a reflection cycle can theoretically work. And in looking at this, you may notice some parallels to the disruption journey visual from several slides ago. It's the questions and prompts that you lead your teens in that will really propel this cycle. So I've also suggested some sample questions that you might pose to your teens, maybe in the aftermath of a visit to a local nonprofit or after meeting with guest speakers or following conversations about the social issues they're working around. And I'd actually love to hear some of your thoughts on these. Do the questions here seem like they might resonate with your work? And what are some additional questions that would fit the kinds of programs you're facilitating for your teens? So let's open it up to hear some of your thoughts.
So press *7 if you have something to contribute. So we're looking for any other ideas about the kinds of reflection questions you would ask your teens. I know many of you do this. Share them with the group. So if you're having trouble coming off mute, please let me know. *7.
Hi, this is Brad Zickles from JTFN.
Hi, Brad.
We do a week-long trip to Nicaragua to do house building, and one of the first reflection questions we really ask is for the kids just to talk about what they're seeing, like give a snapshot of the first day in their mind, like a mental snapshot of what they saw or experienced, and just that one question can get us through about an hour and a half reflection, just them sharing thoughts and things that challenged them and disrupted them that day. So that's where just really asking a simple question: what was one image or one thing that you saw today that you wanted to share?
That's a great example because it really syncs with the what, so what, now what framework that's on the screen there. It's the first stage in the cycle that's listed here is really grounding people in the what that they're seeing and experiencing. So that's great. Anyone else?
Talya, if anyone else has anything to share, any other ideas about reflection questions, please write them in the chat and I can share them out with the group.
Great. Okay, so it's worth emphasizing that planning your reflection, planning when your reflection will take place in advance, so it ends up as intentionally woven in as possible, is critical. Yes, organic conversations that come up are important and pedagogically valuable, but building in structured reflective time is as well. And it doesn't always have to happen at the conclusion of an experience. It can happen in a car ride, during meals, at a coffee shop, in chavruta or pairs. I mean, the possibilities here are endless. And you can also think about the kinds of media that might strengthen the experience or make it more appealing to your teens. Can you use music, art, poetry, journaling, storytelling, drama, or other activities to help prompt their reflection? That's another factor to think about. Now, finally, critical to this reflection bucket is ensuring that participants are in good, emotionally safe spaces as you conclude any conversations, that you synthesize what the group thought about and accomplished in their reflection together, and that they're left with some open questions to continue thinking about until the next time you get together. And if you're able to weave in some of the ideas from the previous meeting to the next time you meet, that's even better. So this slide offers some things to think about when considering each of the three instructional themes I just talked about: education and learning, integrating Judaism, and reflection. And I won't spend time going through these because I touched on many of them already, but this list can serve as a reminder or a checklist of different factors you might take into account as you plan Jewish service learning activities and conversations. So I've shared a lot of information, and I should have prefaced by stating explicitly that Jewish service learning and becoming a confident Jewish service learning facilitator, is a real art. I think I did mention that. It really takes a great deal of experience to master the approach I've described over the last 25 minutes or so. So if this seems a bit overwhelming, that's totally normal. And at the same time, I think that exploring Jewish service learning strategies and activities can be a valuable means of deepening participants' learning and growth as Jewish service people. Which brings us back to where we started, our end goal, which is cultivating Jewish service people. I've tried to make the case for why and how Jewish service learning is a powerful strategy for cultivating these engaged Jewish leaders. and I've tried to offer some suggestions about how Jewish service learning approaches could be tailored to teen philanthropy programs. But in the vein of sparking the kinds of disruption I talked about, I think the first or the first two questions for you may be, A, does this idea of being facilitators of productive disruption and growth resonate with you? And B, if it does, what is it that you want your participants to be disrupted by or be disrupted about? What do you want them to think about and reflect on throughout their Jewish teen philanthropy experiences? And I'd really love to hear from some of you. So let's either open up the line, or if you'd like to share something, I think it's *7.
Sure. I'm actually going to open up the lines now because I think we're also going to have questions after that.
Great.
The conference has been unmuted.
Once again, if you think there's going to be a particular problem with background noise, you can press *6 to mute yourself.
So again, the question is, does this idea of being a facilitator of disruption resonate with you? And if it does, what is it that you're working towards? What is it that you would like your participants to be disrupted by or about?
Lots to think about, lots to take in.
It really is a lot to think about, and I think a related question is, once you reflect on the first two, what needs to happen for me to feel comfortable and prepared to help lead my teens through these processes? What do I need to do or learn or practice in order to help lead experiences that propel my teens' growth in this way? So looking at the time, I'll just leave you to reflect on those questions, and we can open it up for conversation or other questions you may have.
Are there any other questions that you have for Talya?
This is Julie in Portland. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
I just wanted to say I think these questions all bubble up really naturally in the philanthropy work we do here. And I'm just wondering if you have comments on what I most want to help our teams understand is that even a small difference is important. Like when we give funds away, they may say, well, we only have $2,000 for this organization and they have a $3 million budget. How is that meaningful? And even seeing themselves as change agents in the world, I think, helping them understand that even small changes are valuable.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any thoughts on communicating that particular issue with kids, with teens?
Yeah, I think there are opportunities there to look for various Jewish texts and resources that speak to this idea. I know there's the Pirkei Avot, the Ethics of Our Fathers quote that you're not required to finish the task, but neither are you free to desist from it. So that's kind of a common resource that I think is used quite often. But I think there's also an opportunity there to learn and think with the teens about how they're growing as leaders, and this is an early experience that they're having, a training experience that will launch them to be effective throughout the course of their lives. And so are there reflection questions that you can come up with that will help expand that kind of dialogue about how this is one element in a series of activities throughout the course of their lives where they will be better poised to make various differences in different situations.
Thank you.
Other questions?
I'd love to hear what people think about Talya's original question, like how does this kind of framework, the concept of disruption and reflection, specifically, I would pull those out. How does that speak to your experience with teen philanthropy? Does it resonate? Have you thought of these concepts before?
Is the line open, Naomi?
Yeah.
Hi, this is Stephanie. I'm curious, Talya, if you have suggestions for if or how a group leader might facilitate an explicit reflection conversation around how it feels to give through grant making and essentially writing a check to an organization as compared to volunteering or doing some direct service work, as we know that some of our programs provide both types of opportunities to teams.
That's a great question. Thank you. Rachel in Long Island says thank you for that question.
You're welcome.
That is a great question. I think this is where it's helpful to jump back to the slide about integrating Judaism, because when you look into all of these different arenas within the Jewish tradition, whether it's what Jewish spirituality has to say, whether it's instances that have taken place in history where philanthropy has been a marker of Jewish life, whether it's individuals, from the Jewish community throughout history who have really played a role here. I think this arena of thought can provide different access points for having these kinds of conversations with teens. Again, I think, when you establish your learner outcomes, it'll be really specific to your program, what it is that you're trying to help the participants arrive at. But our role is to really facilitate their thinking. From a Jewish service learning perspective, our role is to really facilitate their thinking about these things. From a JSL perspective, it's not about downloading a certain perspective to them as much as helping them grapple with different perspectives and arriving at their own conclusions. So I know that's a little bit vague of an answer, but I think that as much as you're able to aggregate resources and to create a platform for this kind of reflection and thinking, the more meaningful the experience will be for the teens.
Thanks.
And just to follow up with that, I think there really is so much in the Jewish tradition that talks about philanthropy, that there's a lot to draw from.
Do we have any other questions? We have a couple more minutes. Talya, if there are no more questions, I don't know if you have any last things to say in closing, and I also know you might want to put up your contact information, because perhaps this will percolate over the next couple of days. I know some people have asked to see the slides afterwards, so I know you're offering people to contact you. And if you'd like a copy of the slides, you can let me know in the chat box.
Absolutely. I want to thank all of you for your time and attention and for the opportunity to share these ideas with you. Absolutely feel free to reach out to me. My contact information is up on the screen, and I'd be glad to send you any additional resources we may have. Feel free to check out Repair the World's website. It's werepair.org. And, I'm just glad to continue the conversation if you'd be interested. So thank you.
Great. And I'm just putting my own email address into the chat. As I offered before, if anyone would like to follow up with me and learn more about Jewish teen philanthropy work, if you're newer to this call or thinking about how you're going to integrate that into your community's work, I'd love to talk. It was nice to see a couple of new faces, or I guess names, on the call today. And with that, I want to thank you all for participating in today's call, and a special thank you to Talya. Thanks for the wonderful presentation. It was a pleasure to have you today. And I want to remind everybody that our next Lunch and Learn call will be on May 23rd. It is on the topic of celebration and sharing at the end of a Teen Foundation process. and I want to encourage you to look out for an email which will give more information, because this is going to be a new type of call where we're crowdsourcing. So we're going to depend on each of you to bring your thoughts and offer what you do in your own programs together to the call, so it will be extremely interactive. And I hope you all join us then. So before we hang up, I just want to invite you, the lines are open, to join me in thanking Talya and saying goodbye to everyone. So thank you, Talya.
Thank you, Talya.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Please stand by.